You're scrolling through your phone, swiping on faces, jawlines, symmetry, skin. You've got a type, and you think it's your type, something personal, something modern. But here's the uncomfortable question nobody wants to ask on a dating app. If a fully modern human from 30,000 years ago walked into the room right now, cleaned up, dressed in your clothes, sat down across from you, would you swipe right? The obvious answer feels like it should be no. Cavemen, grunting, sloped foreheads, movie poster brutes. That's the image burned into your head by decades of pop culture. But that image is almost entirely wrong, and the real answer is stranger, and honestly a little more flattering to our ancestors than you'd expect. Let's start with the assumption everyone makes without thinking about it, that ancient human means different species, something closer to ape than to us. It doesn't. If we're talking about anatomically modern humans, the ones who show up around 300,000 years ago at sites like Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, we're not talking about a different creature. We're talking about someone with your exact skull shape, your exact bone structure, your exact capacity for facial expression. Homo sapiens hasn't changed much on the outside in that time. The skeleton you'd build a face on is, structurally, the same skeleton being built today. So where does the ugly caveman idea even come from? Mostly from Neanderthals, who get lumped into ancient humans in the popular imagination, even though they're a separate lineage that diverged from us roughly 600,000 years ago. Neanderthal reconstructions used to be based on a single arthritic, elderly skeleton found at La Chapelle-aux-Saints in 1908. Bent spine, hunched posture. And that one unlucky individual became the template for an entire species in museum displays for decades. Modern reconstructions, done with better forensic technique and less bias, show Neanderthals with strong brow ridges, yes, but also broad chests, complex facial structure, and, based on genetic evidence, in some cases lighter skin, red hair, and freckles. Not monsters, just a different flavor of human. And here's a detail that rarely makes it into the conversation. Modern humans and Neanderthals didn't just coexist, they interbred. Genetic studies going back to the sequencing of the Neanderthal genome in 2010 show that most people outside sub-Saharan Africa carry somewhere between 1 and 2% Neanderthal DNA today. That's not a trivial footnote. It means the line between us and them was blurry enough, tens of thousands of years ago, that entire populations found each other compatible partners worth reproducing with. Attraction, in some form, crossed that line. If Neanderthals were universally repulsive by the standards of the humans who met them, that admixture simply wouldn't be sitting in your genome right now. But let's zoom back to Homo sapiens specifically, because that's the real question. Would we find them attractive using our actual modern standards? Here's the part nobody talks about. Attractiveness isn't as culturally invented as people assume. Evolutionary psychologists have spent decades studying what's called averageness and symmetry preference, the finding that across wildly different cultures, people tend to rate more symmetrical, more average proportioned faces as more attractive. This isn't a fashion trend. It's thought to be a signal of developmental stability, a face that grew without major disruption from parasites, malnutrition, or genetic noise during childhood. And that preference shows up in study after study, from Judith Langlois' composite face research in the 1990s to cross-cultural surveys done everywhere from Brazil to Japan. If symmetry detection is a hardwired part of human-made assessment, it didn't just switch on last century. It was almost certainly running in the brains of people at Dolní Věstonice, 26,000 years ago, judging each other by roughly the same rules. It's not just faces either. Researchers studying body shape preference have found a similar pattern with waist-to-hip ratio, a measurement linked to fertility and health that shows up as a consistent preference across dozens of surveyed cultures, from industrialized cities to remote, minimally contacted communities with no exposure to Western media. That's a strong hint the preference isn't advertising-driven. It's older than advertising. Some anthropologists have pointed to the so-called Venus figurines, carved stone and ivory statuettes found across Europe, like the Venus of Willendorf, dated to around 25,000 to 30,000 years ago, as possible evidence that emphasized hips and body proportions were already culturally meaningful back then, whatever their exact original purpose was. Which flips the question around in an interesting way. It's not just would we find them attractive, it's Would they have been judging attractiveness using the same internal software we use? And the archaeological evidence says, probably yes. At sites like Sungir in Russia, burials from about 34,000 years ago show bodies adorned with thousands of individually carved ivory beads, sewn in patterns onto clothing that would have taken, by some estimates, thousands of hours of labor. That's not survival. That's investment in appearance, ornamentation, status signaling, the same impulse that puts a wedding ring on a finger or a tailored suit on a body today. Then there's grooming. We tend to picture ancient humans as permanently filthy, but the evidence pushes back hard on that. Ochre, red and yellow mineral pigment, shows up at human sites going back over 100,000 years, at places like Blombos Cave in South Africa, often alongside tools that look purpose-built for grinding it into usable paste. Some researchers argue this ochre was used as body paint, sun protection, insect repellent, or hide tanning agent. Possibly all of the above, depending on the site. Combs carved from bone and antler appear in the archaeological record tens of thousands of years ago. Tweezer-like tools, sometimes made of shell or bone, show up too, in multiple regions independently of one another. These weren't people who'd given up on how they looked. They were doing skincare and grooming with the tools available to them, the same basic impulse behind your bathroom shelf. Hair mattered too, in ways that are easy to overlook. Genetic research into lice, specifically the divergence between head lice and body lice, which only evolved once humans started wearing clothing, has been used by some researchers to estimate roughly when clothing became common, somewhere in the range of 80,000 to 170,000 years ago. That means for a huge stretch of human history, hair care and hygiene weren't optional extras. They were active, ongoing maintenance, the same category of daily ritual as your shower routine, just running on completely different tools. There's also a more direct kind of evidence, modern reactions to actual forensic reconstructions. Museums and researchers have built lifelike facial reconstructions of ancient individuals, from a Cro-Magnon man reconstructed from remains found in France, to a Mesolithic woman known as White Hawk Woman, rebuilt from a skeleton found in England, using the same forensic techniques used in modern criminal investigations. When the public sees these reconstructions, the reaction is rarely horror. It's usually surprise at how ordinary, even striking, the faces look. A jawline, a set of eyes, a face shape that wouldn't turn heads on a modern street, in either direction. Here's the part that really nobody talks about, though, the environmental factor. Take a modern human, drop them into a hunter-gatherer lifestyle for 20 years, and their body changes in ways that would absolutely register as different to modern eyes. More muscle definition from constant physical labor, weathered, sun-exposed skin, worn-down teeth from a diet without soft, processed food. Fewer dental problems overall, ironically, because there was no refined sugar to rot the enamel. Skeletal studies consistently show ancient hunter-gatherer populations had healthier teeth than early agricultural populations who switched to grain-heavy diets, a pattern documented across sites in the Fayum Depression in Egypt and elsewhere as farming spread. So in some very specific, narrow ways, a Paleolithic-era human might show up to 2026 with better teeth than half the room and a body built by 20 years of unintentional CrossFit. And this is where the philosophical pivot comes in, the part that connects back to your actual life. The traits we call attractive, symmetry, clear skin, healthy hair, physical vitality, proportion, were never arbitrary cultural inventions, floating free of biology. They were, and still are, proxies for health and genetic robustness that mattered exactly as much 30,000 years ago as they do on a dating app tonight. The packaging around those traits has changed completely. The toothpaste, the skincare routines, the hair products, the entire multi-billion-dollar beauty industry. All of that is modern scaffolding built on top of an ancient, unchanged evaluation system underneath. So would ancient humans be considered attractive today? Clean them up, dress them in your clothes, and there's a real chance you wouldn't be able to pick them out of a crowd. Not because they'd blend in by luck, but because the same brain circuitry that's rating faces on your phone right now was already running in theirs, at Sungir, at Dolny Viestenica, at Blombos Cave, long before anyone had a word for attractive at all. The tools for beauty have changed almost beyond recognition. The rules for beauty, weirdly, might not have changed much at all.